Daniel Sports Central, we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the college football playoff semifinal matchup between the Georgia Bulldogs and the Ohio State Buckeyes. Both teams have had outstanding seasons getting to this point. You got Georgia once again in the college football playoff, the defending national champions. They're looking to win a second straight national title. But first, they're going to get past Ohio State. The Buckeyes, coming off of a disappointing loss to Michigan, they're looking for redemption as they return to the college football playoff. The stakes are high in this one. We'll be going over a full game preview and prediction on this match period today, starting with your team trends. Georgia beat LSU for the SEC title 50-30. Got the win in the end, and this team is a perfect 13-0 on the season. It's been a great season for the Bulldogs. This team, they've been such a strong team on both sides of the ball. Defensively is really where this team shines. But Georgia on both sides, there's a reason why this team is the #1 overall team in the college football playoff. Ohio State on the other side lost to Michigan in the last game of the regular season. Missed out on the Big Ten title game because of it. Lost them 23-45. Yeah, disappointing finish to say the least. But once again, I mean, this is exactly what Ohio State needed. You lose the last game of the regular season. You miss out on the Big Ten title game. But they've got a chance. They made it into the college football playoff despite all of that. And they're taking on a brutal team in Georgia. But this is an opportunity for Ohio State to get some redemption. And I mean, there's a chance that, if Ohio State wins this game and Michigan beats TCU as they're expected to, we could see a rematch of Michigan and Ohio State for the national title. What a sight that would be if it were to happen. Games be on Saturday, December 31st in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the second of the two semifinal games. So we got Michigan and TCU on earlier in the afternoon. This is the night game, 8 p.m. Eastern. Spread's going with Georgia by 6.5, over under 62. And the FPI is also going with the Bulldogs here, 57.7%. So the Bulldogs are favored by right around a touchdown here, kind of similar to the Michigan-TCU game. Michigan is favored by just over a touchdown in that game. Series history, Georgia leads it 1-0, and that game was in 1993. And you think about it, the past few years between, Clemson, when they've been a big national contender, and Alabama, obviously the big dynasty over the past few years. And Georgia's really come around the past couple of years in particular. But we've seen matches between Alabama and Ohio State. We've seen matches between Georgia and Alabama multiple times, but we haven't seen Georgia and Ohio State as any of those matchups. We've seen Clemson in this mix as well, but this is the first matchup between Georgia and Ohio State since 1993. Definitely an interesting storyline there. Stat comparison: Georgia is 7th in points per game, 5th in points allowed. This team is just outstanding on both sides of the ball. They're 21st in pass yards a game, 12th in rush yards, and then for yards allowed, they're 56th in passing, 1st in rushing. So, they got the best rush defense in the country. Passing defense is the one, you could say, weak spot of Georgia, but even the passing defense isn't terrible. But they are 56th in the country in pass yards allowed, allowing an average of 215 a game. But this rush defense, only allowing 77 rush yards a game, which is nothing short of outstanding. But you look at this offense getting nearly 40 points a game. Stetson Bennett, he was a Heisman finalist for a reason. He's had a great year, 3,400 yards, 20 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions. He's had an outstanding season. But defensively, once again, that's really, and it was that way last season as well when Georgia won the national title. It was the defense that really that just sealed the deal for Georgia. Their defense was nothing short of outstanding last season, and this year, more of the same. They're allowing an average of 13 points a game, and so this defense is brutal to say the least. And another reason why this is such an intriguing matchup, you got Ohio State, who I consider to have the best offense in the country. TCU is right up there as well, but Ohio State, CJ Stroud, this offense, the receiving core, it's hard to bet against this Ohio State offense, as they're second in the nation in points per game, averaging nearly 45 points a game. That's going to be so interesting, seeing Ohio State's offense with CJ Stroud and obviously Marvin Harrison and Egbuka. This outstanding offense. Going up against this brutal Georgia defense. What more could you ask for? But Ohio State's defense has also been great in general this season. They're 11th in points allowed. They're 12th in pass yards a game. So the air attack is really where this team shines. And if you look at Georgia's passing defense, that's the one main area where they've been a bit vulnerable this season. So keep that in mind. And then Ohio State, they're 26th in rush yards a game. So definitely in the top 30. That's definitely a bright spot as well. And then for yards allowed, they're 13th in passing, 22nd in rushing. Recent matches, Georgia beat LSU 50-30. They did allow 30 points to LSU, but honestly, I'm not too concerned. I mean, Georgia was so dominant at the start. There was like 35-7 at halftime, so you let up some points in the second half, but got to give LSU credit for putting up a fight there, even though they were down for such a long time and by so much. But then they beat Georgia Tech to finish out the regular season 37-14. That game was a bit close at first, but Georgia pulled away as expected. They beat Kentucky the week before that 16-6 on the road. Impressive win against Mississippi State 45-19. Also beat Tennessee, the number 1 ranked team in the country at the time, 27-13. Tennessee was quite a story in the SEC this season. They kind of fell off in November. Obviously, they dealt with a couple of tough injuries, which got a feel for Hendon Hooker in particular. But yeah, so for Tennessee, kind of a rough November, but that was a huge win for Georgia at the time against them. As for Ohio State, they lost to Michigan 23-45. Simply put, a brutal loss. But once again, Ohio State, they're going to have a chip on their shoulder in this match and in the college football playoff, because there's a chance that, Ohio State wins this game, which is a possibility. I really do think. You get to the national title game, you maybe face off against Michigan. There's a good chance. That would be quite a game there in Ohio State. I'll guarantee you it definitely wants that to happen. But they beat Maryland 43-30 on the road, beat Indiana 56-14, beat Northwestern 21-7. Also had that great win over Penn State 44-31. Penn State was quietly one of the best teams in the country this season. They really didn't get too much attention because they didn't have any massive wins, but they were dominant in several of the games that they should have won. Their 2 losses were to Ohio State and Michigan. So Penn State quietly had a really good season. And in the end, that was a definitely a resume-boosting win there for Ohio State. Key points for this one, Georgia 13-0. Bulldogs are a brutal team on both sides of the ball. They got that experience too. That's something that they maybe didn't have quite as much of last season, even though defensively this team was definitely experienced going into last year. But now, you got players. You got Stetson Bennett. He's won a national title. This team has got the experience from last season. They know how to play in this situation now, and that's definitely an advantage for Georgia. And defensively, that's really where Georgia shines. Once again, it was like that last season as well. And this season, maybe they've allowed a bit more points than last season. That is something that you could, that should be brought up as well. This defense was even better last year versus this year. This year, Georgia hasn't been quite as dominant. And that's why this is such an intriguing college football playoff, because quite honestly, any of the 4 teams could win it. Last year, I think we kind of knew it was either Georgia or Alabama. And Georgia, I just knew, even though Georgia lost in the SEC title game, I felt like the Bulldogs defense would really come through, and in the end, that's what happened. But this season, honestly, could be anybody. But for Ohio State offensively, could be the best team in the college football playoff. You could say TCU. If you look at Georgia and Michigan, Michigan is also good on offense, but both Georgia and Michigan primarily are better on defense. Ohio State and TCU are primarily better on offense, especially TCU. TCU's defense, they got a good defense, but if you compare them to the other 3 teams in the college football playoff, I'd say the Horned Frogs defense is definitely the worst, but they got definitely some power on offense. It's every team has got a really interesting storyline heading into the college football playoff. And for Ohio State, got to find a way, got to force some turnovers. Defensive touchdown would be huge here for Ohio State. Especially going up against a brutal Georgia defense. If you can get some points from the defense, that's exactly what the Buckeyes need here. And, they got a chance to prove the world wrong. They, honestly, out of any team in the college football playoff, Ohio State's got the biggest chip on their shoulder here. Coming off of that Michigan loss, Michigan is in the college football playoff. The stakes are high here for Ohio State, and guarantee you they're going to be ready to go for this matchup. So that said, let's get to the prediction here for Georgia and Ohio State. Coming up here in the college football playoff semifinal, the Peach Bowl. And I'm going to be going with Ohio State to win this game. 30-27 is my predicted final score. This one may surprise some of you, but this is one that I've thought about quite a bit. And Ohio State, I feel like this team, we saw them. If you remember back to when they won the national title, they won the first ever college football playoff. They were in at the 4 seed, and they played Alabama, I think, who's in the Sugar Bowl. And they ended up winning the national title, and no one expected them to beat Alabama. Hardly anybody did. But in this situation, the chip on their shoulder, CJ Stroud is an outstanding quarterback that should not be underestimated. I mean, this is kind of reminding me a bit of that time that Ohio State won the national title out of the 4 seed. And Georgia, I mean, I'm not saying Georgia's a bad team at all. This is a really good football team in Georgia. There's a reason why they're the #1 seed in the college football playoff. I mean, they're just the most complete team. But upsets can happen. And Ohio State is a team that I think is very much capable of beating Georgia. And if you look at the one spot for Georgia that you could say is maybe a weak spot, that is the passing defense for Georgia. They are in the top 60. They're in the 50s in that area. And Ohio State, CJ Stroud, and the receivers that this team has, there is a possibility. I'm saying that it can happen. And Ohio State is definitely in a matchup where they can do it. And so I'm going to say 55% towards Ohio State, over under 62. I'm taking the under. And you might say, I mean, if Georgia wins this game, there's a good chance it ends up going over, but it's still 62. And I honestly, on both sides, no matter who you think is going to win, I'm going to take the under for this. But I got Ohio State covering the spread and winning this game outright, 30-27 is my predicted final score. So the last thing I'll say, Georgia, they're the favorite to win this game for a reason. They're very much able to win this game, but do not sleep on the Buckeyes. Appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.